Hi everyone, thanks for checking out the video. Today we are going to practice adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. So let's take a look at some problems that we have right here. This first one says negative 15 minus negative 13. So there are a couple different ways to do this problem. Some people think of it as I have 15 red chips and I'm taking away 13 red chips. So they can do it mentally and say, oh, I'm going to have 2 red chips left over. That's not how I do it, but some people like to do that. My approach is whenever I see a subtraction sign when I'm working with positive and negative numbers, I rewrite the whole thing as an addition statement. So here's how we do that. I think about the 3 parts in the problem. Negative 15 minus negative 13, and then I rewrite knowing that subtracting a negative is the same thing as adding a positive. Subtracting a negative is the same thing as adding a positive, and then this just stays the same. So I think to myself, are these both the same sign? No, they're not. One's a negative, one's a positive. So I just can't put them together and say 28. That can't work because they're different signs. So if I can't add them together, what should I do? Well, forget about the signs. I'm going to subtract the 2 numbers. 15 minus 13 is 2. Then I should think, what is there more of? Are there more negatives? Or are there more positives? In this case, there are more negatives. Another way we've thought of it as is we've used the phrase, keep the sign of the greater absolute value. So this absolute value is greater than this absolute value. Since this one happens to be negative, our answer stays negative. Okay, let's look at number 2. We have negative 6 plus negative 11. Different ways we can think about this. We have 6 red chips. I'll actually draw it up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're adding 11 red chips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. How much do we have in all? Well, we have 17 red chips. Another way to think about that is what we talked about in class. A shortcut to all, instead of drawing out these chips, is if the signs are the same, add the absolute values and keep the sign. So in this case, they're both negative. Since they are the same thing, I can put them together. 6 negatives and 11 negatives make 17 negatives. In this problem, after we rewrote it, notice that the signs were different. When that's the case, you need to subtract the numbers and then keep the sign of the greater absolute value. But here they're the same. That's kind of like the easiest situation, right? And we can also think about like regular addition that you've been doing for years and years and years. This is positive 3. This is positive 5. Hey, they're both positives. I can add them together and my answer stays positive. Well, down here, they're both negatives. I can add them together and keep the sign. It's different when we have different signs. Okay, number 3, 9 minus 22. Subtraction problem again. I don't like those. I'm going to rewrite this as 9 plus, this was a positive 22, now it becomes negative 22. And you might be wondering, why did I put in parentheses? Well, that's because a positive and a negative right next to each other look weird. So we put in parentheses to kind of draw our attention to the fact that they're 2 separate things. Now we do the same thing we had done up here before. Are the signs the same? No, they're not. One's a negative, one's a positive. So subtract the 2 numbers somewhere on the side of your paper. 22 minus 9. Borrow, and we get 13. So I put 13. And then I ask myself, which has the greater absolute value? The negative 22 or the positive 9? Well, this one does. This one has a greater absolute value, so it's going to be a negative 13. If this was on a number line, we would start at 9, and adding a negative means going to the left, so we'd go 9 to the left, and then another 13, for a total of 22 to the left, right? And that would put us at negative 13. Okay, so you can do it with a number line, you can do it with integer chips, but we're trying to get to the point where we don't need either of those. Okay, this problem, are the signs the same? No, they're not. So I cannot add 18 and 8 and say my answer is 26. Can't do that. They're different signs. When they're different signs, I need to subtract the 2, 10, and are there more positives or are there more negatives? Or if you want to think about it as, which one has a greater absolute value, the positive number or the negative number? The positive number does, so our answer is positive. This is your homework, or this is the answers to your homework. You had the honeycomb, you had a bunch of things missing. So you need to take 2 honeycombs, use the symbol on the left, so 9 plus, you can think of this as 9 plus negative 7 was 2, and write it above it. Negative 7, this is a separate problem here with these two. Negative 7 plus 5 is negative 2. Here's another separate one. 5 plus negative 3 is 2, right? This is one problem. This is another problem. Oops. And this is another problem here. And then work your way up. So that was the homework. So to recap, when we're working with addition problems, we have one of two situations. Either both of the signs are the same, or one's a positive and one's a negative. So if they're both the same, we either are adding 2 negatives together, or our old friends, we're adding 2 positives together. I'm just pulling random numbers, right? 2 negatives, 2 positives. Or we have one's a positive, one's a negative, or they're switched. The negative comes first. If the signs are the same, that's the easiest. That's where you can just add the numbers together and keep whatever sign that they had, okay? Add the absolute values, keep the signs. If the signs are different when you're adding, I know this is an addition problem, however, the process you need to take is to subtract the 2 numbers and keep the sign of the greater absolute value. So, again, when you're adding, either the signs are the same and you follow this process, or the signs are different and you follow this process. If you are working with a problem and it's a subtraction problem, you rewrite it into an addition problem using a negative minus a positive is the same thing as, so maybe I should draw this out. A negative minus a positive is the same thing as adding a negative. Subtracting a negative is the same thing as adding a positive. So you would rewrite the subtraction problems into addition problems and solve. Let's take a look at some other ones. We worked today with some partners, working on some worksheets, and here's what we worked on. Those of you who finished them, checked with the answer key, saw any mistakes, went back, worked with your partner to try to correct those mistakes, and then learned from them while we kind of helped out. So let's take a look at these problems. We're adding, right? So when we're adding, and in this case, the signs were different, so we subtract the numbers. 10 minus 9 is 1. Is it going to be a positive or a negative 1? Well, there's more positives than negatives. Or you can think of this absolute value is bigger than this absolute value, so it's going to be a positive 1. Okay, Number 2 is very similar to number 1. Are the signs the same? No, they're not. So I can't just say 2 plus 15 is 17. No, no, no. Instead, they're different, so I just forget about the signs, subtract the two numbers, and get our response. And then finally, I go to myself, is this absolute value bigger than this absolute value? No. The positives is the bigger absolute value. Or you can think there are more positives than negatives, so my answer remains positive. Okay? Again, I'm using these shortcuts, but if you were to think about a number line, right? Here's -2, here's 0, and if I went 15 spaces in that direction, where would I wind up? Well, I'd wind up at positive 13. How about number 3? Oh, subtraction problem. Don't like those. Let's rewrite it. 2. Now, remember, subtracting a positive is the same thing as adding a negative. And then this problem becomes a little bit easier. Are the signs the same? No, they are not. So I come down here, subtract the 2. And ask yourself, are there more positives or negatives? In this case, there are more negatives. So my answer needs to be a negative. How about this next problem? Subtraction again. We don't like those. So rewrite it as an addition statement. Pardon my messy handwriting. I'm doing this with a mouse. It's a little difficult. Again, are the signs the same? No, so we can't just add them and combine, right? We have to find the difference or subtract. 19 minus 15 is 4. Are there more positives or negatives? There are more negatives, so my answer is going to be negative. Another one. Rewrite. This time a negative is being subtracted so instead of doing minus a negative, you can say subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive, and I rewrote my problem. Now it's another one of these situations again. One's a negative, one's a positive. Can't just put them together and say 11, that would be wrong. So we subtract. 7 minus 4 is 3. Are there more negatives or are there more positives? There are more negatives, -3. All right, let's just scroll down. How about 12? -38 plus -12. Well, this goes back to our situation. The signs are the same. They're both negatives. Ooh, we love those. That's so much easier to work with. 38 negatives and 12 negatives together make 50 negatives. Or you can think about it as the signs are the same, add the absolute values, and keep the sign, -50. Number 13 is like two problems built into one. First, we need to answer this problem, get that answer there. Then we need to add in the -4 and do it again to find another one. So, -9 plus 11 can be rewritten as -9, I'm sorry, -9 minus -11 can be rewritten as -9 plus +11. The signs are different. Subtract and keep the sign of the greater absolute value. In this case is +2. Now everything else comes down. Plus -4. Okay. Are the signs the same? No, this is a positive value. This is a negative value. So we need to subtract. 4 minus 2 is 2. Are there more positives or are there more negatives? Negatives. Our answer is -2. I will leave you to work out the rest. I direct you to other resources that I'll be posting on the site. Practice those, see how you're doing, in order to prepare for tomorrow. Thanks for watching the video.